It was one of those warm June evenings in our suburban Austin home when I noticed it. A gold cufflink lying on the entryway table, gleaming under the amber glow of the hallway lamp. The kind of thing you'd expect to find in an expensive gift shop in London or maybe tucked in a velvet case in a jeweler's display. Not sitting casually among the unopened mail and Linda's sunglasses. It wasn't mine. I'd never owned cufflinks in my life, gold or otherwise. The initials engraved on its smooth surface are DS. Were sharp and deliberate, etched with the sort of precision that came from careful craftsmanship. They didn't mean anything to me, but the moment my eyes locked on them, I felt that small, involuntary pause in my breathing. I didn't touch it at first. I just stood there, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of the wall clock. It felt like one of those moments where the smallest action, like picking it up, might change something you couldn't undo. The sound of tires crunching on the driveway snapped me out of my daze. Linda's car. A few seconds later, the front door opened, and she stepped in like she owned the evening. She was wearing a fitted emerald green dress I'd never seen before, the kind that drew your eyes whether you wanted to look or not. Her hair was styled with that meticulous, effortless look, and the faint scent of men's cologne, subtle but unmistakable, drifted in with her. It wasn't mine. I watched her set down her clutch on the console, her hand brushing dangerously close to the cufflink, but she didn't so much as glance at it. If she saw it, she didn't acknowledge it. Instead, she launched straight into motion, her heels clicking on the hardwood as she moved toward the kitchen. "You wouldn't believe the mess the caterer is in for the gala," she said, already rifling through the refrigerator. "I told them if they didn't have the menu finalized by tomorrow, I'd find someone else. Can you imagine? 2 weeks out and they still don't have the wine pairings confirmed?" Her voice had that practiced, confident edge, the same one she used at board meetings when she needed to dominate a room. It was rapid fire, full of details and deadlines, and I could feel the narrative she was constructing like a wall between us. A conversation about the gala was safe. The gala was important. The gala was where she wanted my focus. I didn't say anything about the cufflink. Not yet. Instead, I followed her into the kitchen, leaning against the counter while she moved around like she had a dozen things to do before the sun went down. She talked about the silent auction items, about how the mayor's wife was hinting at wanting a more prominent seating arrangement, about how she might need to schedule another meeting with the decorator. She moved from one subject to the next without stopping for air, every sentence brimming with purpose, as if the more she spoke, the less room there'd be for me to ask anything else. I half listened, but my mind kept circling back to the entryway table, to those 3 letters, to the way she had brushed past them without even pretending to notice. At one point, she glanced up and caught my eye. For a fraction of a second, her expression shifted, just a flicker, but enough for me to notice. It was there and gone so quickly that if I hadn't been watching her so closely, I might have dismissed it. But I saw it, a tightening around the eyes, the kind of micro-expression you get when someone knows you've noticed something you weren't meant to. "So," she said brightly, pouring herself a glass of wine, "I was thinking we should invite the new couple from down the street to the gala. They're young, they've got money, and they're looking to make connections. Good for the cause, you know?" The way she leaned into "good for the cause" made me want to laugh, or maybe shout. But instead, I just nodded slowly, feeling that strange, hollow heaviness settle in my chest. I thought about asking her where she'd been, about the dress, about the cologne, about the cufflink that wasn't mine and certainly didn't belong to any of our friends. But the words didn't come. Not yet. She kept moving, kept talking, and I realized she was doing what she always did when something needed deflecting. Filling the air with so much noise that you started to doubt the silence you'd noticed before. It worked well enough for most people. But I wasn't most people. I stayed quiet through dinner, nodding at the right places, making the occasional comment about wine lists or seating charts. She didn't seem to notice my detachment, or if she did, she didn't address it. Her world was neat, composed, and free of loose threads, at least the ones she couldn't control. When the dishes were done, she disappeared into the study to make a phone call. I could hear her voice drifting through the slightly open door, measured, polite, professional. Could have been anyone on the other end. But it didn't matter. I couldn't stop thinking about that cufflink. After she went upstairs for the night, I walked back to the entryway. It was still there, exactly where I'd first seen it. I picked it up this time, feeling the weight of it in my palm. Heavy, solid, expensive. The initials glinted in the low light, mocking me with their anonymity. I set it back down carefully, almost exactly where it had been, as if disturbing it too much might break whatever fragile hold I had on the situation. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. I stood there for a long time, staring at that small piece of gold, until the ticking of the hallway clock reminded me how late it had gotten. I didn't have answers yet, but I had questions. More than I'd had in a long time. And I had a feeling I was going to find them, whether she wanted me to or not. Back in the quiet of my study, I closed the door and let the hum of the house recede until all I could hear was the fan on my desk and my own breathing. The cufflink still sat under the entryway lamp like a lit fuse in another room, and the longer I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop, the more the last 6 months began stitching themselves together in ugly, undeniable patterns. It wasn't the dress alone, or the whisper of cologne that didn't belong to me. It was the slow drift that never announces itself. The kind that moves a picture a half-inch on the wall every day until one morning you wake up and it's not where you left it. That's what we'd become. A picture sliding out of frame while we pretended the nail was still solid. It started with business dinners. At first, once every couple of weeks, nothing to make a scene about. Then it was 2 in the same week. Then a stretch where she was closing fiscal reports 3 evenings in a row. A script always ready. The guilty smile, the soft apology, the takeout bag dangled like a peace offering. A shrimp curry here, a slice of key lime there. The edible equivalent of don't ask questions. And the invites stopped. I used to be her shadow at everything. Ribbon cuttings, donor breakfasts, art openings where you speak in compliments and leave early to beat the valet line. Then came the first no. You'd be bored, it'll be quick. I told myself she was right. The second no came with a hand on my arm and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. By the 5th, she'd started calling them workspaces instead of events, as if changing the noun changed the rules about who belonged. When we did go out together, to dinner, to an exhibit, to the kind of cocktail party where people hold their laughter at jaw level, she picked corners with sightlines to exits. Little architectural caves where sound died before it reached the next table. If a colleague approached, she would stand before they arrived, intercepting them halfway, steering bodies the way you angle a chair before company sits. My presence turned invisible in those moments, something she could drape a napkin over and return to later. Then there was the phone. Linda used to tease me about my screen time reports and tell me to put the thing down. Lately, her phone lived in her hand like it had a pulse of its own. I'd watch the preview banner bloom, see her eyes flick to a message, and then gone. Not just the notification, the thread, the crumbs, the history. Delete, delete, delete. Once, on the couch, a message popped up with a thumbnail of a champagne flute. She tilted the screen, smiled at nothing, and set the phone face down, the way you lay a card you don't want anyone to read. Money started talking in a new accent. Our budget sprouted odd little outcroppings. A boutique in San Antonio we'd never visited. A private car service on a Wednesday. A florist's invoice marked miscellaneous. We're grown-ups, no secret stashes, no games. Still, shoes appeared without boxes, a dress without tags, a set of cuff bracelets that looked like they belonged to someone who didn't have to look at price stickers. Art books, too. Heavy, beautiful tomes that would be at home on a coffee table I'd never seen. Weekends used to be ours. Lazy mornings that slid into the Barton Creek Trail, farmers market tomatoes lined like a color chart, a late lunch that turned into cleaning the grill because we decided to host somebody sometime soon. Then Saturday was swallowed by site visits and last-minute donors, and Sunday needed recovery from both. My suggestions: blue starlight at dusk, a drive to Wimberley, folding laundry while the game murmured in the background, started earning that peculiar irritation that sounds like a sigh wrapped in a calendar alert. Can we not plan every minute? I'm exhausted. I told myself stories to keep the ground steady. Big projects swallow people. Leadership costs time. Austen rewards momentum and punishes hesitation. But the silences grew curated. I'd ask the friendliest questions. Who was there? What did you eat? See anyone we know? And get answers that were aggressively neutral. A few folks. Something light. Not really. The blandness felt sprinkled on. A seasoning meant to cover the taste of something richer. It was the small, stupid things, too. The ones that only matter because they keep piling up in the same corner. A second toothbrush in the guest bath, then gone the next day. A dusting of concealer on a dress shirt slung over the laundry room door. A shirt I hadn't worn. A cologne I couldn't name lingering in the garage. Like someone had leaned on the workbench and laughed. Scout, our mutt with opinions, started waiting by the back gate around 7. The way dogs do when a routine has shifted underneath their paws. I remember one night too clearly. Linda said a committee was meeting at a hotel bar downtown. She left at 6 in flats and a navy blazer, practical, unremarkable. At 9:30, she texted that the committee had turned into dinner, that I shouldn't wait up. At midnight she floated in on newer heels, hair loosened by some wind that didn't blow on our street. A private brightness on her face that belongs to an inside joke. She stood at the bedroom door and told me they'd hit a fundraising target. I congratulated her. She kissed my cheek like a punctuation mark and fell asleep with her phone under her pillow. Another time I offered to drive her. Traffic was a mess and I had a meeting near the same stretch of downtown. She laughed like I'd suggested we arrive with a marching band. It's out of the way, she said, then texted me an address that mapped to a private club behind a gate. When I asked about parking, she said they validate too quickly the way you answer before the real thought arrives. But the most telling shift was her narration. Linda used to tell stories with edges and texture. Voices imitated, a pause for the absurd parts, the exact phrasing of some compliment she pretended not to care about. Lately, her recaps sounded like press releases. Successful, productive, strategic. If a name appeared at all, it was an acronym. RDS is pushing for a short lead time, she said one evening, and I had to hide the way my heart tripped over those letters, as if language could leave fingerprints. I kept filing it under stress, under ambition, under a season where int * Macy had been outsourced to urgency. But fragments organize themselves whether you want them to or not. The picture wasn't detailed yet, but the outline refused to budge. In the study, I slid open a drawer and took out a notebook I hadn't touched since grad school. The one with graph paper and a coffee ring on the back. I dated the top of a page and began listing the things that wouldn't stop echoing. The dinners, the deletes, the purchases, the acronyms, the cologne. It felt pathetic and necessary at the same time. I wasn't hunting a gotcha. I was trying to convince myself I wasn't inventing a ghost because I was bored or insecure or jealous of the version of her that Austen had decided to applaud. At some point, Scout nosed the door open and pressed her weight against my shin, the canine version of, "Tell yourself the truth." I scratched behind her ears and told her we were fine. She thumped her tail twice, then looked away like even she didn't buy it. I closed the notebook and watched the ceiling fan saw the room into quiet thirds. The house made its nighttime noises, pipes settling, the refrigerator exhaling, a car passing on the street like a wave that forgot to brake. Down the hall, the closet door slid on its track. Hangers rasped. A zipper stitched the air. I thought of the cufflink again, small and bright and insistent, carrying 3 neat letters I had never seen in our home before this week, this night, this version of us. None of it was proof, but it all felt like gravity. And you don't argue with gravity for long without hitting the floor. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of early summer afternoon when the sun feels like it's taking its time, stretching the day longer than it should. I'd left a client meeting earlier than expected. My tie loosened, the traffic surprisingly light. As I drove back toward the house, I passed through the business district and spotted something familiar in a place it didn't belong. Linda's car, parked neatly outside a private club I'd only ever seen in glossy magazines. One of those members, only places with manicured hedges, frosted windows, and a valet in a navy jacket. At first, I thought I must be mistaken. Maybe it was the same model, the same color. Maybe someone else had the same sun-faded sticker on the rear windshield. But as I slowed, my eyes caught the faint dent on the rear bumper. A dent from a grocery store parking lot 2 years ago. The one she'd brushed off as barely noticeable. No, it was hers. I turned the wheel and eased into a space half a block away. The club's wide, curtainless windows gave an unobstructed view of the interior. It was all soft lighting and polished wood, the kind of place where everything, wine, conversation, even laughter, was meant to be quiet and expensive. And there she was. Linda sat at a small, round table against the far wall, across from a man in a tailored charcoal suit. Not a colleague I recognized. Not anyone I'd ever seen in the orbit of her committee dinners or charity events. His tie was loosened, and his posture leaned inward, close enough that I could see the glint of his watch when he moved his hand. Her hand was on his knee. Not brushing, not accidental. Resting there like it belonged. They were angled toward each other in that subtle way people do when the rest of the room doesn't matter. Between them stood a chilled bottle of champagne, the kind with gold foil at the neck, and a single shared dessert. Something glossy and dark, a small silver spoon laid between them like a promise. I felt something inside me go still. Not an explosion. Not the cinematic flash of rage I'd imagined if I ever saw something like this. Just stillness, like all the gears in my head had stopped at once. She laughed at something he said, tilting her head back. That same bright laugh she used to have in the first years of our marriage when I could make her forget she was supposed to be careful. He reached forward, his hand covering hers briefly. Not the one on his knee, the other, and I noticed the way she didn't pull back. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. The scene was complete without sound. My fingers curled around the steering wheel, though the engine wasn't running. For a long time I just watched. People came and went. Waitstaff in pressed white shirts, other members sliding into seats, the valet opening doors. None of it touched them. They were sealed in their own small bubble, their voices just low enough to keep the rest of the world out. And then I remembered the cufflink. Gold. Engraved. R.D.S. It had been on our entryway table 2 weeks ago, gleaming under the lamp. The letters had meant nothing to me then. But now, staring through the glass at the man across from Linda, I saw it. The glint of gold on his shirt cuff when he reached for the champagne. The same sharp lettering. I could have gone inside, walked right up to them, pulled out a chair, and asked how the dessert tasted. I could have taken a photo, a video, something to pin to the growing list of questions I wasn't asking out loud. But I didn't. I stayed in my car until they finished their champagne, until Linda laughed again and brushed something invisible from his lapel, until they stood and walked toward the back exit instead of the front. The valet wouldn't have a ticket for them. They'd parked somewhere more discreet. When they disappeared from view, I turned the key and drove home the long way, windows down, letting the humid air blur the smell of leather and air freshener into something neutral. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I decided I wouldn't say anything. Not yet. That evening, she came home at her usual hour, a grocery bag looped casually over one arm. She'd changed. Jeans, sandals, hair down, as if she'd been running errands instead of sipping champagne with a man whose cufflink I could still see in my mind. She set the bag on the counter, pulling out a bottle of wine and a loaf of bread. "Thought we could do something simple for dinner," she said, smiling like there was no weight in the room at all. I asked how her day was, and she gave me the script. Productive. Busy. The decorators team was behind schedule. The committee might have to reschedule their next meeting, and the new couple down the street had finally RSVP'd for the gala. Her voice was even, her hands busy, her eyes never lingering on mine for more than a second at a time. I didn't tell her I'd seen her. The knowledge sat between us all evening, invisible but heavy, like an object under a tablecloth, its shape obvious even if she pretended not to notice. Later, when she went upstairs, I stood in the kitchen alone, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I thought about the champagne, the cufflink, the way her hand had rested so easily on him. It wasn't the act itself that hollowed me out. It was the certainty, the absolute absence of doubt. Proof didn't need to be loud. Sometimes it was just two people in a room full of others, leaning toward each other like there was nowhere else they'd rather be. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was replaying the scene at the club, though it was there, looping like a muted film in the back of my mind, but because of what came after. the silence at dinner, the easy way she'd poured herself a glass of wine, the way she'd asked if I wanted to watch something together. There are moments in a marriage when you realize the fight is no longer worth having. Not because you're giving up, but because you've stopped confusing noise for progress. I didn't need a screaming match. I didn't need to corner her into the same tired denials. What I needed was distance. The next morning I woke up early, before she stirred. I showered, dressed in a shirt I hadn't worn in months, and made coffee like it was any other day. She came down the stairs eventually, her hair still damp, the faint smell of her shampoo following her into the kitchen. "Morning," she said, moving toward the fridge. "Morning." I kept my voice neutral. She started talking about the gala again, how they might swap out one of the auction items, how a certain wine vendor was offering a better rate. I let her words run their course, nodding when appropriate, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Downtown, in a real estate office I'd called the night before. By lunchtime, I was standing in a bright, glass-walled apartment 3 blocks from the river. It was in the business district, close enough to my office to walk, far enough from the suburbs that Linda wouldn't have a reason to pass by. The view was clean and impersonal, a sweep of skyline that didn't carry any history. The agent handed me the lease, her voice warm and brisk. "It's available immediately," she said, sliding the pen across the counter. By the time I returned to the house, the papers were signed and a move-in date was inked into my calendar. My move-in date. I didn't announce it. Instead, over the next week, I began to peel my life out of the home we'd built. A suit jacket here, a box of books there. I told her I was dropping some things at storage when I needed cover. The trick was to move slowly enough that it didn't register as absence until the absence was complete. She didn't notice. Or maybe she noticed and chose not to say anything, the way I'd chosen not to mention the club. Either way, the silence was its own kind of agreement. The night I moved the last of my essentials, she was on a call in the study. Her voice carried the bright, performative lilt she used for donors and board members. I walked past the door without slowing, keys in my pocket, the weight of a new set pressing into my palm. The apartment was bare when I unlocked it, just the soft echo of my footsteps against polished floors. I set my boxes down in the corner, the city's hum drifting in through the open balcony door. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was mine. For a couple of weeks, I lived between worlds. I'd see her occasionally, passing at the house when I needed to grab mail or check on the yard. She never asked why my car wasn't in the driveway as often. She never asked why my side of the closet was empty. Then, on a Tuesday evening, she found me. I'd been sitting in the apartment's small living room, drinking coffee with Julia Harris, the owner of a prominent art gallery I'd met through a mutual friend. Julia had a way of making conversation feel easy, unguarded, like you didn't have to choose your words so carefully. We were discussing a new installation for the gallery when the door buzzer went off. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Linda was standing there. She looked the way she did before a gala, poised, but with an edge in her eyes that wasn't for the cameras. "This where you've been?" she asked, stepping past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. Her gaze swept the room, landing on Julia. The recognition was instant. Julia's face was well known in certain circles. "Hi," Julia said, offering a small, polite smile. Linda didn't return it. "So," she said, turning to me, "this is what you've been doing?" "Living my life," I replied, my voice even. She blinked, as if that answer had landed somewhere she hadn't expected. "You just left. No conversation, no explanation. You disappear, and now I find you here with her?" I could feel Julia watching me, unsure whether to stay or excuse herself. I gestured lightly toward the coffee table. "Julia's a friend. We're working together on something for her gallery." Linda gave a sharp laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. Work." I didn't rise to it. "You didn't notice I was gone, Linda." "Not really. And if you did, you didn't care enough to ask." She opened her mouth, but no words came. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator. "I'm not here to explain myself," I said finally. I'm here because I decided I didn't want to keep playing the same game. Julia set down her coffee cup gently. I should go, she said, rising from her seat. You don't have to, I told her. But she shook her head, giving me a small, understanding look before slipping out the door. Linda stood in the middle of the room, her arms crossed. So what now? You think you can just walk away from all of it? I already did, I said. Her face flickered. Anger, disbelief, maybe something else. But she didn't follow me when I walked past her toward the balcony. Outside, the city lights were coming on, one building at a time, like a new constellation finding its shape. When I turned back, she was gone. The next few weeks passed without incident. She didn't show up again, and I didn't go looking for her. Whatever conversation she'd hoped to have had evaporated in that apartment doorway, leaving nothing behind but the quiet knowledge that we were no longer on the same map. It wasn't a dramatic ending, but I'd stopped expecting one. Some things just close like a door you don't bother to lock because you know you're never going back through it. The invitations called it the annual Civic Arts Gala, but everyone just said, City Hall. The way you'd say church, even if you hadn't believed in years. I wasn't planning to go until the week before, when the new Art Center's board finalized the sponsorship slate and Julia slid a folder across my apartment table. Our names, hers and mine, were printed together on a single line. Equal partners. It felt less like a label and more like a decision I had finally allowed myself to make in daylight. I had a suit tailored for the first time in a decade, navy, clean, a tie that didn't try too hard. Julia met me on the steps of City Hall, her dress the color of dusk right before the streetlights flicker on. The summer heat clung to the stone columns. The banners snapped in a friendly wind. I could hear the soft crosstalk of donors and staffers mingling in the atrium, that familiar orchestra of compliments and calendar talk. Inside, the air smelled like chilled glassware and lemon polish. A quartet worked through a standard by the staircase. A couple of city staffers shook my hand. A photographer waved at Julia. We stood together easy. For once, nothing about my posture felt like a performance. Linda arrived later. I saw it happen the way you notice a storm on a flat horizon. First the stillness, then the sudden shift of nearby conversations. She was beautiful. She's always been. But the gown demanded attention. She paused on the marble landing and scanned the room, searching for the line where admiration would break into applause. Didn't. The applause never came. Her smile held anyway. She descended with measured grace, touching shoulders, greeting by first name. She reached for the old choreography. Air kisses, quick jokes, a mention of past victories. But the room had already rewritten itself. People weren't unkind. They were simply elsewhere. I slid past her the way you skim a paragraph you've already read. Julia squeezed my hand, a small anchor. Ready? She whispered. For what? To let them know this is real. We moved through the crowd together. It wasn't triumphant. It was ordinary, steadier than any victory lap. We talked about the opening exhibition, residencies we wanted to fund, making space for students who had only ever seen art on screens. I caught the symphony director laughing at something Julia said, and a council member thanked me for stepping in. The word partner kept finding me. Funding, vision, the plain work of showing up. I didn't go looking for Linda, but inevitably, our orbits crossed. She stood near the donor wall, flanked by two acquaintances from years of cocktail hours. When she spotted us, her eyebrows lifted in an expression that asked a dozen questions at once and answered none of them. Michael, she said, voice smooth, like a host rescuing a guest from solitude. Julia. Good to see you, Linda, Julia said. You too, I added, because civility costs almost nothing. Her eyes flicked to the lapel pin that marked me as one of the evening's lead sponsors. The moment was small and private, but I watched it land. I wasn't aware you were involved at this level, she said. It came together quickly, I replied. Well, she began, turning to the men beside her. We're about to announce a continuation of the cultural initiative I launched last year. I'd love to discuss ways to align. A program coordinator appeared at her elbow with a clipboard. Ms. Avery, "Can I borrow you for a moment?" The coordinator led her a few steps away and spoke in a careful hush. I saw the tiniest falter in Linda's posture, the kind you notice if you've memorized someone's silhouette. Julia touched my arm. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. And for once, it wasn't a rehearsal. We took our seats as the lights dimmed and the podium warmed. The MC moved briskly. Gratitude, donors, the season's calendar. When they reached the sponsorship slide, our logo filled the screen alongside the city seal. The Austin Art Center, inaugural partners, Julia Harris and Michael Kent. My name looked strange up there, unaccompanied and free of parentheses. The room gave the polite applause these nights require. I didn't search for Linda's face. Then came the announcement. "Tonight," said the deputy mayor, "we are thrilled to introduce a unified cultural initiative, Studio Austin, a collaboration between the Art Center and the city to fund public installations, youth workshops, and living stipends for emerging artists. This program consolidates prior pilot efforts and expands them citywide." The word consolidated did all the quiet work. A ripple moved through the rows. Whispers, nods, phones raised. My chest didn't swell. It settled. Studio Austin wasn't revenge. It was a lifeboat big enough for more than the usual suspects. Still, I knew what it meant for Linda. Her initiative had been the pilot. The pilot had been absorbed. The new banner would hang where hers once hung. Intermission poured everyone back into the atrium. The avoidance grew teeth. A donor she'd courted for years gave her a smile marked reserved, and then turned to ask Julia about studio square footage. The arts reporter who used to quote Linda verbatim asked me how we planned to recruit from East Austin schools. When Linda approached a circle of board members, someone checked a watch. Someone else pointed toward the stage, and the knot loosened without making space for her to step in. Humiliation rarely arrives as a blow. It drizzles and refuses to stop. I stayed near the edges, answering questions I wanted to answer, repeating open access until it sounded like a promise. Every so often, Linda would drift into my peripheral vision, alone for a beat longer than a person like her is used to being alone. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and clear. Near the end, the MC announced an additional gift, a fund named for a beloved public school art teacher. Julia squeezed my arm. The teacher had been hers. The room stood. When I finally exhaled, I saw Linda by the exit, one hand resting against the marble. Our eyes met. No accusation, only the stunned arithmetic of someone measuring a room that didn't add up anymore. On our way out, a photographer caught us. "One more for the column?" he asked. "Sure," Julia said, and we obliged. No theatrics. Just two people who had decided to build something that didn't require permission. Outside, the night had cooled. The steps held the last of the crowd. Drivers checking texts, a teenager on a scooter, a couple arguing softly. Julia looped her arm through mine, easy and unclaimed. "Hungry?" she asked. "Starving," I said, and we walked toward a taco truck parked just beyond the circle of light. Behind us, the banners snapped again in the wind, and for once, I didn't turn to see whether they still had her name on them. I already knew the answer. The night didn't crown anyone. It moved on, and I let it. For first time in months, I did.